Hello, I'm Judy with Hope Dementia Ministry. Our topic today is about what happens when caregiving ends. A lot of times people struggle with figuring out who they are again after coming out of the caregiving role that they've been in for many years. We think about the big change that comes when you get a diagnosis of dementia. And there is a lot of change that comes with that. We know that a future planning changes. We know that our retirement is going to be different than maybe what we had originally planned that it would be. If you were caring for a parent, maybe your whole work schedule had to change. Maybe someone even left a career in order to be a caregiver. So we know that there's dramatic change in the beginning. And then we kind of grow with the caregiving situation. Maybe we add other caregivers outside of the family if we need extra help and that kind of thing. But then if you find yourself lucky enough to be in the 50 to 70% of caregivers who survive the person living with dementia, then you face another big change. And the big change that comes when someone is done with caregiving often is quite sudden again. Sometimes not. Sometimes if their loved one is in a long-term care facility, they are easing into this change, but sometimes it is right up until the last day they are full-time caregiving, and then life changes dramatically. And when that happens, people find themselves, because their days have been totally consumed with their caregiving duties. And so when they wake up one day and they have only themselves to think about, a lot of people feel like they don't know what to do. They don't know where to turn. They don't know where to start. They don't know what life is anymore. Because although life was hard, it followed a certain pattern. And now that has changed again. And often people think, what do I do now? Or who am I? They have so left who they were behind to take on this monumental task that they find themselves not really understanding who they are again at this point. And I want to share with you two instances in my personal life of people who were caregivers long-term and how they emerged from that. One is my mother-in-law. She cared for her husband for probably the last 5 or 6 years of his life. They were married about 17 years altogether. And as his health started to deteriorate, he was on oxygen. He couldn't walk as far, so that meant they had to take a wheelchair along with them in places that they went. And then it got to where he couldn't really get out of the house very much. So she was doing all those hands-on personal caregiving type things. And she was doing it all herself. So if they had an appointment to go to, that meant lugging the wheelchair, getting him out to the car, getting him into the car, putting the wheelchair in the car, taking it out, the routine. And so it was hard on her physically, but she really hung in there and she did the job. But what she gave up in the meantime was a pretty substantial social life. They had a lot of friends. They did a lot of traveling. And she did a lot of things on her own. She was a dancer. So she had this ladies dance group that they did, and they would do little recitals and things like that. She was part of a Red Hat group. And so they had their social outings. And she had lots of other friends that she did all kinds of things, shopping and lunches and all that kind of stuff with. And so when the caregiving became full-time and she wasn't able to leave him, or it was just so much more demanding, she stepped away from all of those things. And she sort of lost touch with those people. And at the end of her caregiving years, she found herself to be in basically a different body as well. She had aged, her health had deteriorated because of the stress and the hard work that caregiving was. So the same things, opportunities weren't available. She couldn't just pick up and fall right back into her former life. The route that she ended up taking was going through a support group. And I'll talk a little bit more about the details of that, but that was where she went. That was what she looked for and where she went. The other example I want to share with you is a couple that were friends with us, and he became a full-time caregiver of his wife 10 years before she passed. And she had fallen into a diabetic coma for a week, and she was in a nursing home. And then when she came out of that coma, she needed full-time care. So he actually gave up his career. They were much younger. So he actually gave up his career and he became a full-time caregiver for his wife. She was 3 days a week on dialysis. She was legally blind. And so very, very debilitated and needed constant and continuous care throughout the next 10 years. And so what he found over that 10-year period, his life became something that revolved around her. If she wanted to join a group, or if she wanted to attend a meeting, or if she wanted to participate in something, he took her everywhere that she wanted to be, and he kind of hung out while she was at her meeting or whatever. But everything revolved around her, getting her to dialysis. Then he had an hour or two where he could go and do something on his own, but he had to be there to bring her home. And so by the time that the end of the caregiving happened, she was in the hospital for a while. He didn't have a real long time to prepare. And so once she passed and after the funeral, he woke up and found himself in a world that he didn't really recognize. He Every minute of his day was geared around caring for her. So when all he had to think about was himself, he didn't really know where to go with that or what to do. Now, his approach was a little different. He did try a support group, a grief support group, and that wasn't necessarily his thing. So what he did instead was he got himself a pet and he started concentrating on the house and the yard. So he did his more on a personal level, his recovery and his working through his grief. He still had some things that he was involved with, but it was more on a personal level, where my mother-in-law was more on a social level with her grief support group. And when we talk about grief, different people handle grief differently. And when we look at people who live to be over 100, it is said that one of their secrets is that they deal better with loss than a lot of the population. And when you think about by the time you've reached 100, you have lost your parents, you've probably lost siblings, you may have lost children, you've probably lost a lot of friends and classmates and lifelong companions. And so people who manage to deal with that, accept that loss, and move on are ones who are not as debilitated by stress and the sadness and the grief of the loss. So looking at working through grief, that's the most important step here. We need to grieve when we lose someone. That's an extremely important step. But how we do that can often be the key as to whether or not we move on from the grief or whether that takes us down as well. So if we don't address the grief, people carry sadness and stress with them, and that can kill you. So it's really important that one way or another, we work on working through the grief, accepting the loss, that life is going to be different, but there is life to live. There can be life to live after this loss. Some people tend to think more about the future. Some people in their caregiving, they are more in the day to day. So when the end comes, they haven't made any future plans. They haven't thought about what the future is going to look like. where other people who have thought about, well, if I'm left alone, this is something I might like to do. I've talked about my mom and dad before. My dad's 92 and my mom's 81. So I think for her whole life, they've been married over 60 years. For her whole life, she has sort of had in the back of her mind that she's going to survive her husband. And so they're also very open about talking about end of life. Um, they're very, we all know we're going to die. Everyone's going to die. Death is part of life, but some people want to ignore it until they absolutely can't ignore it any longer. My parents tend to be much more proactive about it. They got their will and their trusts and all that kind of stuff lined up. I think I've even mentioned before, they even have their headstone and it's all engraved and everything. It's all set to go. But my mom has always said things like, well, when dad dies, I'm getting myself a dog. And then he lived longer and longer. So she ended up getting a dog anyway. But this has always been in the back of her mind. A lot of people have a big 50th anniversary celebration. Well, my dad was 30 when they got married. So she didn't think he was going to maybe be around at 80. So they had a big 40th anniversary party. And, at a hall, everyone was invited. It was huge. It was wonderful. But then when 50 years came around, she's like, well, okay, it's 50, we should do something. So out at their farm, we had a picnic kind of anniversary party. And then they made it to 60 years. And my dad had his 90th birthday that year. So we threw a big bash at the hall again. But, again, in the back of her mind, and she has prepared us for this all along. So if I get a call from my mom, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this could be the call. This could be the call. So we've talked about it. They joke about it. So it has prepared us more than I think if we were in a family where it was never talked about. And so people who are in a caregiving situation where they don't know when the end is going to be, but a lot of times they're so all encompassing with the project that they're involved in that they don't have a vision for the future. They don't think about what would I do if I could. They don't have a bucket list. They don't have time to work on that kind of thing. And so sometimes it's not until after the person passes that they really start to think, okay, where am I going to go from here? What's going to happen? And so one of the biggest, most important things I think that people can do for themselves is to get some grief counseling. If you don't feel like you want to be in a group where you're sharing with other people, then at least a one-on-one counselor to talk through things, to talk about how you feel. Because people have a lot of feelings and those feelings need to come out. We need to be able to express how we feel and the intense sadness or the loneliness or whatever. We need to be able to talk about that. And if we don't have a group that we can talk to, then at least a one-on-one counselor would be a good idea. But the whole group setting can be very good because often when you get into a support group, it's with people who have experienced something very similar to what you've experienced. Caregiver support groups are not always people who've been dementia caregivers. It could be other types of illnesses, but someone say who's lost a spouse. So a group of widows and widowers have a lot more in common and understand feelings that the others might be experiencing better than, say, someone who has lost a child. If you've lost a partner and someone in the group has lost a child, there's not the connection, there's not the similarity in circumstances. So you want to find a group of people who have similar circumstances. The best place to start for grief support really is if you have used a hospice company, that is part of it. That is part of what's built in grief support for the spouse, the family, the children. Everybody together is supported through hospice services. If you're in a situation where you haven't used hospice and you don't have that connection, then you want to look through maybe your church, local AARP groups. There's lots of ways. And if you're in a situation where you're interested in grief support and you don't know where to start, please contact me and I can help you find something in your area. Also, healthcare systems. If like, say you doctor in the Henry Ford healthcare system or something like that, they have grief resources as well for people. Um, So what does grief support do for you? Well, it helps you come to terms with the loss. It helps you put it in perspective. It validates your feelings, your tremendous feelings of loss and loneliness. Those are very valid feelings. Someone who's lost someone has a big space left in their life. But it helps you to not feel alone. Um, we're in a time where everyone is worried about feeling alone or feeling isolated, and we're coming into winter. We can't get outside as much. We can't experience things that we have been through the summer. And so the pandemic has things locked down. But for people who are tech savvy, as all of you are, because you're viewing this tonight, um, there's still options out there for you that can be very helpful and very supportive. And also, grief support groups help to ease you back into society. You may have lost touch with a number of people that have been in your life before. And, after you lose someone, there's kids and there's family around for a while, but they all tend to want to get back into their lives as well. So having grief support can give you an avenue to getting back into something that is a little bit more social and to ease you back into productive living. We all need to be productive. You hear about people who retire and then they die because we need to have a purpose. We need to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. We need to have a reason to get dressed because there's something that we want to go and we want to do, or we want to join online, or we want to participate in. And so if we don't have those kinds of things to look forward to, we can fall into depression and we can stay isolated. And the negative health effects that that has on you are extremely important to think about. Depression can bring on dementia itself. So we want to avoid that. We want to understand that human beings need to be social. One of the healthiest things you can do for yourself is to be social. Of course, being physically active and those kinds of things too, but the social aspect of life is extremely important. So you think about what's next. Thinking about life in terms of I and not we. You have maybe been in the we mode for many, many decades. And so now to be on your own, maybe you haven't made that many big decisions on your own. You've always been consulting with a partner or something like that. So now you have to think about, what do I want to do? And what I was telling you about my one friend whose wife was very ill for 10 years, he had never really thought about what he wanted to do. What were his hobbies? Because his life was so involved in um, making access for her to enjoy her hobbies and her kinds of things that she wanted to be involved in. So he was really kind of excited about this opportunity, and he was still fairly young. He was only in his early 60s. So he was able to really think about what he wanted to do, what was on his bucket list, what interested him that he didn't have to get permission to be involved in or something like that. And so he got himself, like I said, he got himself a pet. He installed a pond in his backyard. He took a master gardening class to become like a consultant. Not that he was ever going to work as that, but that was something that he really liked to do. He would travel around and go to different nature areas and really studied plants and flowers and things like that. So it was something that had been in the back of his mind maybe, or had been a hobby of his from his previous life that he had just totally let go, but it helped him to reconnect with who he was. So it was very enjoyable for him. Now, my mother-in-law, as I said, joined this widow and widower support group, and she had lost touch with this other social circle of hers who were just more able to travel and more able to go and do things where she was too grounded. And because her own health had deteriorated, she wasn't able to go back to dancing. So that was something that she had to let go of. But this support group became sort of a social circle for her. They became good friends, especially the group that started when she first lost her husband, because they were all sort of new to the group. And as you might think, sometimes people leave and new people come in, but they have sort of banded together with this 8 people, and she's actually dating one of the gentlemen from this grief support group at this time. So that was her avenue to finding who she was, and things that she wanted to do, and where she wanted her life to go from there. So as you're thinking about that, um, you have to know that it takes time. It takes time to decide when is it time to clear out your loved one's clothing and other possessions. Um, that was a slow process for both of these people in my life. They had to sit on it for a while. They had to come to terms with where they were, and they had to work on themselves for a little bit before they could make that next step of moving on. And they did that in different ways too. My mother-in-law kind of did it on her own, bagged things up and donated a lot of things. My friend's husband invited her group of lady friends over to the house to go through things with him. I think he needed that support. He didn't want to do it alone, and so we all went there, and we all sorted through her clothing and decided where this could be donated or that could go be donated. And he felt really good that her things were going to a good cause, and so it was very therapeutic for him. He cried, but it was all part of the process, and it allowed him to then move past that next step and really look at the house as his now. He could paint whatever colors he wanted. He could install whatever electronic equipment he wanted. And, I think he sort of enjoyed that freedom. So when you're thinking about those next steps, you have to go on your own timetable. You might have family members who are saying, "Well, isn't it time, that you got rid of dad's clothes, or isn't it time that, you go through mom's stuff and clear this out of here?" What timetable is right for them is not necessarily the timetable that's right for you. And so you have to let them know that, "I'm not ready yet. I'll get there, but I'm not ready yet." Or, if you think moving on something right away is the best way for you to go about it, and they're not on board with that, again, you have to do what you think is right for you in the situation. And then you have to think about things like what needs attention now, because as you've been in your caregiving duties for many years, there are certainly things that have been left by the wayside, things that need tending to. Some of those things might be personal. It might be you need to get to see the doctor yourself. You need to have some tests done. You need to get your flu shot. You need to get some physical activity. So, if you've been ignoring yourself, that should be first on your list of things that you need to update. Um, Maybe there's some home repairs that need, maybe there's a faucet that's been leaking or a toilet that's been leaking for years because you just have had so much on your plate, you haven't gotten around to it. So make a list of the things that you want to try to accomplish. And then think about, what needs to be done now, what needs to be done down the road. Um, we're coming into winter. So maybe, you're not going to worry about the stuff that's outside. There's trees that need trimming or things, that need to be tended outside. But now maybe isn't the time to focus on that. Maybe you want to focus on the house. Maybe you want to do a deep cleaning. Maybe you want to do some repairs. Maybe you want to do some painting. Something that's going to make you feel fresh and new in some way. But then you also have to think about who's going to do it. Are you in the position to do it yourself? Are you going to enlist family to come and help do that? It could be a healing process for everyone to, give the place a facelift, to freshen things up, to make everybody feel fresh and new. Maybe there's things you're gonna have hired out. So, you find a handyman or somebody a technician to come in and work on some of these things in your house. Whatever it is, it's good to just start thinking about what that plan is going to be. What makes you feel in control of your life again? Because we talked about how that's one of the basic human needs is feeling in control and making decisions and making things happen. And then, once you feel like you kind of have that part of your life, you've addressed some of your physical and emotional needs. You've looked at your physical surroundings. The next thing you have to think about is your social life. And maybe your social life has been completely dependent on your partner in the past. Maybe your partner is the one who um, makes the card playing date or invites someone over for dinner or makes plans to get together with the kids. Well, now that's going to be your responsibility. And is that something that's new to you? Or is that something that used to be part of who you were as a person? Social interaction is extremely important. Even if we can't do it in person, if you've got a friend who doesn't know how to Zoom, teach them how to Zoom and get on there and have a conversation. Talk about things that are going on in your life. Have some fun. Play a game. You can. There's ways to play games on these social media sites too. So that's something that could be fun for you. Are there still things that you can do? Are you still physically able to dance or bowl or, some activities that you used to participate in the past? Then you should get back into that. Um, Forming new connections is something that is very likely going to come out of this process. Um, if you have joined a group, a grief support group, then maybe you're going to build relationships with these people, that you want to get together with them. You have a lot in common with them. They understand what you've gone through. You don't have to talk about it because they know. Maybe that's what you talk about at the support group, but then you get together socially and you can just have a good time being you. Um, so when we think about life needing purpose, um, no matter how old we are, we don't want to just sit in a chair and watch TV the rest of our lives. We want to be stimulated. If you're watching TV, it should be something interesting, educational, documentaries, learning about something you didn't know before, broadening your horizons, opening your mind, um, teaching yourself about some social priority that's out there that you want to know more about, but really something that stimulates you. Our brains need stimulation. We need variety. We need new things coming into our lives. So if you have, maybe you've had hobbies that you really enjoyed, you haven't been able to get to for the last several years. So take a look, take an inventory. What do you have? Are you a woodworker? Are you a crafter, crochet or knitter? Do you sew? What kind of things do you have that you could really just jump right back into? And that helps you to feel more like your old self, feel more connected with who you are to the core. But don't limit yourself to what you've just done before. Are there things that you'd like to try? Are there things that you have thought about, like I'd like to learn how to paint. Um, my sister-in-law is planning to retire in a couple years, and I said, so do you have plans? She listed off this whole big group of things, and one of the things was painting. She wants to learn how to paint. She doesn't know why, but just that she thinks that would be cool. She'd like to do that. And so that's on her list. Um, but maybe you play a musical instrument. What about learning a new one? Something that's in the same vein. It's not totally out of the blue, but something that would be a little bit challenging for you, challenge your mind, challenge your body. Um, Dancing, learning to dance, woodworking, skydiving. Is there something that you thought, well, it's too late now. Maybe it's not. I read a whole article about a 99-year-old man who went skydiving for the first time. And I know that we're limited right now with the pandemic. There's just a lot of things that are limiting in our lives. But if we can think creatively and try to come up with something that's interesting and stimulating to you to help you feel productive and useful. And don't discount volunteering. Um, there's a group called Seniors Helping Seniors, and what they do, they're volunteers, and they go into people's homes. Say maybe a caregiver needs to go to a doctor's appointment, and so they would bring a senior volunteer in to sit with the care recipient and visit with them, or play cards with them, or do a puzzle with them, or something like that. You know personally what it's been like being the caregiver who needs a little bit of respite. What if you could provide that for someone else? If you could go in and, for a couple hours, sit and be friends with someone and just be there with them and be some social connection for them while their caregiver gets out and does something that they need to do. So keep something like that in mind, but also learning new things, engaging your mind, um, you know, reading is very stimulating for your brain. And then, especially if you're living in your own home and you find yourself in this situation alone for the first time, in your life, maybe you want to think about moving to a more social setting. Now, that could be a big thing that, you're not ready for, but and again, I know the whole COVID situation, but a lot of the assisted living complexes do allow for socializing with people who are on lockdown. So you're not going anywhere, they're not going anywhere. They have to wear masks, but they can socialize. They can see other people, they can do activities, they can experience things together. And it's built in, and we're not going to be on pandemic lockdown forever. And so if it's something that you think maybe down the road in the future might be something that you would like to think about, now's the time to start thinking about it, planting that seed in the back of your mind, and maybe gathering information about different places that are in your area. Or maybe you want to relocate so you're closer to one of your children or more of your children, that you can see grandchildren more often or something like that. Um, you know, Nobody necessarily wants to leave their own home, but if it's better for us all around to be in a more social, a more open and active environment, then, maybe not be have that off the table. Um, so I know that there are lots of questions that people might have. If you need help finding a support group of some kind, finding a grief counselor, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I can help you find something in your area. So there's any other kind of questions that you might have, email me, call me, contact me through the website, Hope Dementia Ministry. Um, .com, and we'll see where we can go, and what ways we can help you. So thank you and have a good day.